episode today is sponsored by Volato. Few words about Volato. They launched in early 2021 as a fast-growing private aviation company, disrupting the category with innovative solutions to fractional ownership, jet cards, charter, and more. Volato operates one of the largest and most modern fleets of Honda jets in the world. Understanding the value pilots contribute to the business, Volato's program helps pilots thrive and share in the company's success. Volato pilots receive robust training and a balanced lifestyle. Volato prides themselves on delivering the best customer and work experience and safety without compromise.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to FAPA Talk. We are here today with Jessie Naor, founder and CEO of Flyvisor, which is an aviation M&A advisory and business consulting firm. Jessie is a private and business aviation subject matter expert, author of the Sky Strategy column in the Business and Commercial Aviation section of Aviation Week Network, the co-founder and former president of Grandview Aviation. Jessie sits on multiple industry advisory and regulatory boards and is, in general, just an all-around aviation industry enthusiast. That is you in a nutshell. Thank you so much, Jessie, for being with us here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I think I'm like a grown-up av geek, as they would say at this point. Yeah, so I come from an aviation family. I think like a lot of folks that get into this industry. My dad was a controller. My mom was a flight attendant. I was working on the air traffic control path, and then one day ended up meeting my partners who we started Grandview Aviation along the way. So that was an amazing experience. We were a private charter company. I actually left them this May because we had sold last year. But we had gotten to a fleet of 19 Phenom 300s operating all across the country. It was an amazing ride, but I certainly have been grateful to kind of take a little bit of time off, but also continue to stay engaged in the industry by writing and sharing my knowledge with business owners. So thank you very much for the intro.
You are welcome. Thank you very much for that background. Definitely, you're someone that has got a little bit of a non-traditional route path role in aviation. So many people think aviation is just you go to flight school and you fly airplanes. You have gone in a completely different direction, which is exciting.
Well, I think people should too kind of, be open to change and pivoting. I thought I was going to be a controller. That was my path, but I ended up getting involved in this business and I just loved it so much that I just kept learning from there. My growth was pretty organic at the company. I started just as a salesperson. Then I went and finished and got my MBA at Johns Hopkins University, and eventually became, president of the organization. So I think it's never too late to change paths, and where you think you're going to be 5 to 10 years from now may not be where you're actually going to end up. So be open.
Awesome. It's like the Garth Brooks song. You thank God for unanswered prayers. You never know what's going to happen, and sometimes it's great. Yep. So from your corner of the aviation industry with what you do, what do you see is going on in the industry right now?
Yeah, so I think all of us last year, and I think pilots were in a great position to get positions last year. Obviously, it's kind of slowed down a bit. I know that we're seeing different air carriers kind of slow down hiring. What I'm looking at right now is it feels like the frenzy of increases is kind of over. The big shuffle is starting to subside. Now I think we're at a place where pilots and employers need to kind of level out what's the right fit, and what business and what style of flying works for me long-term for my life. Because I think, salaries overall have generally come up in every part of the industry. Now you need to start thinking about, okay, quality of life, type of job fit, what's going to be the right fit for me moving forward, both from the employer and from the pilot perspective.
Okay. I often hear people talking about when they're looking for the best salary, the best company to go for, they're just looking at hourly rates and hourly rates and hourly rates. And that's one part of the equation. There is an equation, hourly rate times X. And like you talked about the quality of life, sometimes the contractual benefits really make a huge difference. So there's a lot that needs to be looked at.
Yeah. And you get to the position and you're earning, a great salary, but then you're like, I'm kind of miserable, and I think that's probably where we're getting to is everyone jumped into those high pay roles and they're like, okay, maybe maybe long term, this isn't the right fit for me. I need to think about it.
Absolutely. I mean, we look at pilot hiring over the last 30 years, and I always say it looks like the front of a Charlie Brown shirt. It's up and it's down and it's up and it's down. And if you're just chasing a salary, at some point you are going to be disappointed,
Yeah.
and it's not going to work for you. So, you talked about people need to go ahead and look at some of the other options to see what works best for them. And like we kind of mentioned already, it's more than just airlines. So why would someone choose the private and business aviation, whether we want to call that charter or fractional ownership or straight up corporate? Why would someone choose that route over maybe the most obvious and traditional airline route?
Yeah, and I think the difference in, my industry, private aviation, is just the variety of roles and the types of jobs that you can choose and types of flying that you can get into. There's people that don't necessarily want to fly the biggest and the boldest. I think, once you get to the point where you have flown the 737 and everything else, it's not all it's cracked up to be at some point. I know that's like the end goal for some people. But eventually you may get to the point where like, I don't want to go in and out of LaGuardia every day, or, where Chicago or wherever it is. The cool thing about private aviation is every single day could be something entirely different. That's also not a good fit for some people. Some people like routine and schedule and knowing what's happening. But there's certainly people that don't. At the same time, there's different motivations. You could be someone flying VVIPs, so you've got political figures or celebrities in the back, you get a chance to kind of like hobnob and talk about who you've flown. On the other side, there's lots of medical missions and things that are fulfilling, from a life perspective, doing organ transplant missions where you're taking a heart to someone or transporting a doctor team to get to where they need to go to. Those are very different things that fulfill you in life that aren't necessarily related to cash benefits. But at the same time, it's unscheduled, and it's a very different unscheduled world than, the airline, the typical pilot.
And again, like you said, some people love that. I worked as a paramedic for a while, and the not knowing what you were going to go and find, there was an element of an adventure. There was an element of excitement, and
And
having to go ahead and pack. Yes.
Yeah.
And, having to pack your suitcase with both your Hawaiian shirt and your winter jacket.
Yeah.
Again, kind of fun.
Well,
So,
and
you talk.
Oh, sorry. No, and you don't just
No,
show up to the airplane and, dispatch has your information ready to go. Like, you're really involved in the full planning of the trip. That can include picking up passenger catering sometimes, which isn't ideal. But to have your kind of hands dirty and I think get back to actually doing full planning and analysis, that's really exciting for some people. And it goes back to kind of think that real passion of flying. And you're not just a bus driver. You're in it. So
absolutely. You talked about a couple different aspects of the private and business aviation. You talked about flying the VIPs, the celebrities. You talked about the organ transplant and medical side. What are, and again, there's no way we could define all of them because they're limited only by someone's imagination. But what are the more common private and business aviation kind of roles or routes, and what makes each one of them unique?
Yeah, I think probably the most common, is if you're going to go the fractional route, flying for someone like the NetJets, FlexJet, those sorts of companies. And those can be great because they have such a large pilot pool that I think a lot of times you have kind of similar, calendars to the airline style. So you can pick, okay, I want to do these days of the month. You get kind of the seniority level, so you can pick and choose kind of when you want to fly. But they are a little more typical. A lot of flying in the winter is going to be New York to Florida all day long. You might do 4 of those in a day and be like, okay, I'm really tired of Palm Beach at this point. But then there's a huge medevac space too. So especially for helicopter pilots, which is probably different than a lot of folks listening, but there's probably some out there. But that can be really, fun and engaging and exciting, to be, saving lives on a day-to-day basis. But a lot of that means you get to stay home too. You're based at a hospital. You're not going to be out of the road for 10 days. You're going to be back home with your family, after you do your shift, which is attractive to a lot of folks.
Okay. Fantastic. When you're talking about the difference with the schedule, and when you're talking about a fractional ownership like a NetJets or a FlexJet versus the charter side, obviously there's different regulations they're operating under, but from the pilot's standpoint, is there a huge difference between flying for one or the other?
Yes. I would say you need to be really diligent in the questions that you ask during the interview process. I think, unfortunately, 135 has gotten a bit of a bad rap over the last few years because there was kind of some loose interpretations of the duty and rest regulations. There's a lot of companies that do it right, and they'll be proud to tell you that they do it right. So I think you need to ask them in the interview process, how do you handle fatigue calls? How do you, if someone's flying for 4 days on night shifts in a row, at what point do they get a break? Or am I expected to fly, night shift, day in, day out, and not really have compensatory rest to, protect from fatigue? So the bigger companies, I think, generally will do it right. There's a lot of small companies that do as well, but that's something that you should really ask and understand. And I think it's caused a lot of people to look at 135 and go, that's kind of like cowboy flying. I don't really know if I want to be there. But I will say there are a lot of good companies. You probably need to dig a little bit deeper than you normally would.
Sure. Okay. Fantastic. So, so you talked about some of the reasons someone might want to go and go the private business aviation route as opposed to going the airline route. What are these carriers and companies doing to attract, or more importantly, retain their pilot talent?
Yeah. Well, I think, the good thing is for these 135 companies that are competing against some pretty massive airline packages, they really can't compete necessarily on a pay perspective. It's just not, the economics of the airplanes just don't allow for that. There's not 200 passengers in the back to kind of distribute that cost. It's just the reality of our world. But at the same time, you have a chance when you're at a small company like that to really build a sense of community and culture, and for the pilots to really be engaged in the process of building the company or modifying, the manuals or the safety programs and the process. Like, someone can really get a chance to get their hands in and be involved in the business and not just necessarily be a cog in the machine. So I think the more that companies can do that and to build that type of engagement, again, you talk about the salary versus what are the other benefits. Being a part of something that's bigger than you and enjoying it and contributing and feeling valued, that's huge for people. I think, you get to a certain salary point in your life and you're comfortable and you can provide for your family, but to be fulfilled emotionally and professionally, I think that can bring something special to the table. But also just things like getting them home. We talked about the medevac companies can do that more often, but also the private companies can do that more often. Like, hey, I'm going to make sure that you're home, a week this month. We can give you your schedule a year in advance because we're running an 8 and 6 with all these different crew members, and that's how we're going to do it. So there's lots of little ways to plug and play. I think going to events like FAPA and talking to pilots and understanding what are they looking for and what is important to them can be really helpful for these small companies. But yeah.
Okay. There was another question that came up while we were chatting. Come on, brain, find it. You were talking about the schedule, quality of life. One of the things that I think we see some more of the business aviation carriers doing is bringing a pilot in, either positive space or ticketed, on a day of work versus a day off.
Mm-hmm.
The commuter lifestyle for the airlines, if you are a commuter, which about half of all the pilots are, you're commuting usually on the last day of your vacation, for your time off, and you're commuting in on the first day. So that 4 and 3 schedule starts becoming a little bit different.
Right.
Do all carriers, or the majority of the 135/91K carriers, usually bring you in on day one of a trip to allow that 6 days off to be 6 days purely off?
I think it depends on the company. It's hit or miss, but that's something that you could bring up in the interview process too. I think these small companies have a little bit more flexibility on occasion. Not every time. If you're going to, the big fractionals, probably not. But the small companies, you say, hey, look, I'm going to live in Orlando, but you want me to start out of Kentucky. So let's work something out to where, I get to actually, get paid on my travel day, and it's not just a wasted day for me, and a real schedule. So I think it's something to ask. I don't know what the norm is at this point, but I do know there are some carriers out there doing that.
Absolutely. You're never going to find anything out if you don't ask for it. And it's more than hourly rates. It's more than shiny jet syndrome. It is the quality of life. It is the contract. It is the policies that make it a great way to go.
Well, and I think too, pilots today obviously have a lot more bargaining chips. So, bring it up in the interview. If you're going to get some sort of flexibility, you're much more likely going to get it at a small carrier than you're going to get from a large carrier. So think about that as you're talking to folks.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about FlyVisor, what you do and what your company does. Again, had a very, very brief kind of elevator pitch description when we started, but give us your version of it.
Yeah, no, thanks for the plug. So yeah, I started FlyVisor. As you know, I founded Grandview and went through the process of not only running a company of almost 300 employees at some point, but at this point in my life, I want to work on projects. So I've been doing projects for other small businesses, particularly helping them with the sale process. A lot of people start a business just because they have a passion and they enjoy it and they want to do what they love. But at some point down the road, you're going to need to sell. Or you're pass it on to your family members. But sometimes family members don't want that. So what I do is I come in with these organizations and kind of help them with that process. Like, what is that exit plan going to be one day? And how do you need to prepare your business to get there? Because there's all sorts of things that can be done to increase the value of the company. But you have to start before you get to that sale process. If you wait until you're in negotiations, there's really not much you can do. So that's a lot of what I'm doing now, helping people with pilot hiring and retention and those sorts of projects. So just basically what I did at Grandview, but on a small piecemeal setting.
Sounds fantastic. And again, you talked about your education and what you've done. If someone is listening to this and they're hearing what you do, saying, my gosh, I would love that. What type of education and experience would you think they should have to be successful in this type of role? Not trying to train your competition, but just talking about the different side of aviation.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I think it all comes down to if you're hungry or not. No one's going to give you a leadership role. I definitely pushed in my life to get where I am, and I said, hey, I want to do that. How do I do that? Asking a lot of questions. I was never afraid to pick up the phone and even talk to competitors and be like, I'm doing that, or, how would I, do that at some point down the road? I mean, when I first started, we had one Bell 407 helicopter. I was a nobody from Baltimore. I went to my first NBAA event and was like, hi, I'm Jessie. What do you do? Oh, great. That's a huge company. Nice to meet you. But I was just open. And I found people are always really willing to give you tips and tricks and advice along the way. So that's it. I don't know if there's much more to it than just being open. And when you don't have the skill set, you figure out how to get it. I went back to school to Embry-Riddle to get my bachelor's in aviation administration. And then I went on to get my MBA at Johns Hopkins because I realized there were some gaps in my knowledge if I wanted to be an executive and get where I wanted to go. So that's what I did.
Awesome. You bring up a good point to the person that maybe shows up to a FAPA event and they've never been to one of these before. Well, we get people saying, I don't even know what to ask. And what you just did is fantastic. Lead in with that. Hi, I'm here. What should I ask?
Yeah, what do you
happy
think?
to go and tell you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think people, especially in aviation, we all have this passion and love for just the industry in general, and we like helping each other. And that can be competitors, that can be people vying for the same position as you. If people don't want to help you, that's fine, but it doesn't hurt you to ask. So always be willing and open to do that.
Awesome. Fantastic advice. So we'll go ahead and start wrapping things up. We'll just throw a couple fun questions in there. In your capacity at Grandview, when we're talking about hiring pilots, recruiting pilots, or interviewing pilots, what is your best, worst, strangest, craziest, or most memorable pilot interview story?
Yeah, there's many.
You got to just pick one. Just got to pick
Pick
one.
I think the thing, that was really shocking to me as an employer, and maybe, even other pilots potentially, I wasn't usually involved in the interview process at that point. That was usually up to our chief pilot, our HR folks. I was more on the business management side, but, I've got lots of stories from things over the years. But there was one pilot that interviewed, and I was thrilled to meet he or she. I won't disclose which, keep it totally anonymous. But this pilot had over 25,000 hours of experience. I mean, you look at the resume and you go, wow, great personality. Just kind of checked every single box, wanted to be where we were, was very glowing reviews about the company and how they wanted to be there. Then we got them to flight training because obviously we hired them. They seemed like a great fit. Couldn't pass the sim, and we couldn't understand what's going on here. And over time, we realized that the vast majority of that pilot's experience had been kind of like a pilot monitoring role, doing overseas cargo work, and really they hadn't touched an airplane in almost a decade. So on paper, things can appear amazing, but you really don't know what you have until the person is in the role. And that's vice versa. You can interview with a company and say, oh, they sound amazing, and they said all the right things. Then you get there and it's, so there's always a risk. I think that's just part of this process. Everyone wants to put their best face forward, but then when you get to the reality of the situation, sometimes it's not always what you expected. But that was, man, it was so disappointing because I was like so excited about this candidate. And then, I mean, we sent them to the simulator multiple times, but it would not happen. And they actually ended up, later we found out from the training company that person is there about every 6 months or so.
Oh, wow.
Trying to pass a different simulator. So crazy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
There's a difference between hours and experience, and you
Absolutely.
can't judge a book by its cover. Take the metaphor. We got it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Interesting. So all right, last question I've got for you. Real or imagined, flown it or not, what is your favorite aircraft?
I mean, this is probably a lot of people's, but the Blackbird, I can't get over it. It's just the coolest plane. They had cool matte black paint before it was cool. The fact that
they were goth before goth was a thing.
They were goth before goth was. Jet A fuel was leaking out of that thing until it got hot enough and sealed up. I mean, it's just, come on, how can you beat an airplane like that? And maybe there's like a stealthy one out there we don't know about today that's just as cool, but I'll say the Blackbird for now.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. The speed check story that I'm sure you've watched multiple times. I show it to a bunch of my classes as much as possible. It's always amusing every single time. But that aircraft,
I don't know how many stories at this point are just made up, but it's got that like the mystery about it over the years. So
exactly, it's like Atlantis. If we think it exists, we're not sure, but no, I think it's absolutely amazing. So. All right. Well, Jessie, thank you so much for your time today. Before we go ahead and wrap things up, is there anything else that you want to go ahead and add and leave our viewers with?
I'll just say I'm on LinkedIn at Jessie Naor. I post a lot of content, and I'm always happy to, share some knowledge and tips. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have a specific question or something. I can't say I can answer a lot of questions, but I definitely do get back to folks that reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect. Networking has always been huge for me. And I would love to kind of reach a hand back to anybody trying to build their network and do that. So.
Awesome. Jessie, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Good luck to you in 2024, and we look forward to chatting with you soon.
Thank you so much.